The day humanity received the signal from the stars, Ambassador stood in the United Earth Assembly and watched the message play for the 100th time. 17 alien species, they called themselves the Galactic Council, and they welcomed Earth to join the community of civilized worlds. The chamber erupted in cheers. Finally, humanity was not alone. Finally, they had friends among the stars. Led the delegation aboard the transport that would take them to the council station. She sat beside Captain, who commanded Earth's small fleet of exploration ships. Behind them, Engineer reviewed technical specifications on her tablet, her eyes bright with excitement. They were about to see technology that humanity had only dreamed of. The journey took 3 weeks, and every day brought new wonders. When the council station came into view, orbiting a neutron star that pulsed like a cosmic heartbeat, felt tears in her eyes. It was beautiful beyond words. The council chambers were vast, carved from a single massive asteroid. 17 species sat in a circle, each more alien than the last. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few existed as clouds of gas contained in crystalline shells. They greeted the humans with what their translators called warmth and ceremony. The head counselor, a being that looked like a walking tree, spoke of unity and cooperation. Felt hope swell in her chest. This was the beginning of something wonderful. Then they presented the treaty. The Accords of Limitation, they called it. Every new species must sign it before joining the council. Read through the document and her hope began to crack. Humans could only settle 12 worlds, no more. They must submit all military designs for approval before construction. Certain technologies were forbidden entirely, classified as dangerous to galactic stability. Earth would pay an annual tribute of resources for what the council called administrative costs and protection services. Captain leaned over and whispered too. His face had gone hard. This was not a treaty between equals, he said. This was a list of chains. Read further and her stomach sank. The tribute amounts were staggering. The technology restrictions covered everything from advanced engines to medical research. The 12-world limit would trap humanity in a tiny corner of space, while the council species spread across thousands of systems. Had been reviewing the forbidden technology list on her. She turned it toward, her finger pointing at entry after entry. Every single restricted technology, explained, was something the council species sold to others at high prices. They were not banning dangerous tools. They were eliminating competition. The council was not offering partnership. They were demanding submission. Requested time to discuss the treaty with Earth's government. The council agreed, but their smiles seemed less warm now. During the recess, walked through the station's public areas and saw other species, the younger ones who had joined the council recently. They looked tired. Their delegations were small and their ships were old. When tried to speak with one group, they hurried away, fear in their eyes. That night contacted Earth through the quantum communicator. She explained the treaty's terms to the assembled leaders back home. The debate raged for hours. Some argued they should sign. Refusing might mean war, and Earth was not ready to fight 17 species. Others insisted that signing would doom humanity to permanent inferiority. They would be forever trapped, forever controlled, forever small. Captain spoke up during the debate. He had been analyzing the council's fleet composition. Their warships were impressive, he admitted, but they were also old. Very old. Some designs were thousands of years unchanged. The council had grown comfortable and complacent. They had not fought a real war but this observation did not help Earth's immediate problem. Even old warships could destroy Earth's cities if humanity refused the treaty. For 3 months, humanity debated. During that time, the council began to apply pressure. Human ships were docking rights at council stations. Trade convoys that Earth had sent to nearby systems were turned away. Rumors spread through the galactic networks that humanity was dangerous and unstable, not ready for peaceful contact. The isolation hurt. Earth's economy had already begun adapting to the possibility of galactic trade. Now those hopes were being strangled. The council summoned again. The tree-like head counselor spoke in gentle tones that somehow felt like threats. The treaty was for humanity's own good, he explained. Young species were reckless. They needed guidance. They needed protection from themselves. Look at the stability the Council had brought to the galaxy. Thousands of years of peace. No major wars. No catastrophic weapons. All because species agreed to follow the rules. Asked what happened to species that refused, the Councilor's branches rustled in what might have been a shrug. Some chose isolation, he said. They stayed on there, cut off from the galactic community. A few tried to resist and learned that resistance was futile. The Council had resources beyond counting, but the Councilor was certain humanity would make the wise choice. Humans seemed intelligent enough to recognize reality. Back on Earth, the pressure mounted. Economic forecasts showed disaster if the isolation continued. The military reported that several Council observation ships had taken positions near Earth's orbital stations. Not threatening, not yet, but present. Watching. Waiting. The message was clear without words. Sign or suffer. Received her orders. Earth's government had voted. They would sign the Accords of Limitation. It was the practical choice, they said. The survival choice. Humanity would sign and bide their time and hope for better days ahead, but saw the defeat in their eyes during the video call. This was not hope. This was surrender. The signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, stood before the Council and placed Earth's seal on the document. The Council celebrated. Music played. Lights flashed in colors human eyes could barely perceive. The head counselor declared this a joyous day, the day humanity joined civilization. Smiled for the cameras, but the smile felt like poison on her lips. Captain stood in the observation deck and watched the celebration below. Joined him, her face grim. They did not speak for a long time. Finally, broke the silence. He said that humanity had just learned an important lesson. The galaxy was not a place of equals. It was a place of predators and prey, and the predators wore smiles and spoke of peace while they sharpened their teeth. Asked what they should do, looked out at the stars beyond the station, the vast darkness between galaxies. Someday, he said quietly, humanity would find a way out of this cage. He did not know how or when, but he knew it would happen. Humans did not accept change easily. They never had throughout their history. This would be no different. On Earth, people watched the ceremony and felt the weight of what had been lost. They had reached for the stars and found only a new form of slavery waiting for them. 50 years had passed since humanity signed the Accords. 50 years of living in chains that grew each year. Dr. Minu sat in his laboratory on Earth and stared at another rejection notice from the Council's Technology Assessment Bureau. His research into improved food synthesis had been. The reason given was that such technology might destabilize existing food distribution networks. What they really meant was that it would compete with Council corporations that sold food to developing species at inflated prices. The 12 human worlds were bursting at the seams. Population had doubled since the signing. Earth itself had become crowded beyond comfort. The colony worlds were no better. Every inch of habitable land was being used. Children grew up in cramped apartments, looking at the stars and knowing there were thousands of empty worlds out there that they could never touch. The Council said no. The Accords said no. The answer was always no. Diplomat worked at the Council station, representing Earth in the endless meetings and debates. She had been there for 15 years and had learned how the system truly worked. The 17 Council species held all the real power. They voted in blocks, trading favors and making deals in private. The younger species like humanity had votes too, but those votes meant nothing. Any proposal that benefited newer members was killed in committee. Any complaint was buried under procedure and bureaucracy. She watched as another younger species were destroyed piece by piece. They had developed a new agricultural technique that doubled crop yields. The Council declared it unsafe without testing. The testing took 12 years. When it was finally approved, they had to pay massive fines for using it during the testing period. Then they had to license the technique back from a Council corporation that had stolen and patented it. The delegate had wept openly in the chambers. No one helped him. Commander commanded Earth's defense fleet, what little existed of it. Every ship had to be built using Council-approved designs. Those designs were generations old, slow, and weak compared to what Council species used for their own militaries. When requested permission to upgrade the fleet's weapons systems, the request was, when he asked for better engines, when he suggested basic shield improvements. Earth's fleet was a joke, and everyone knew it. Pirates raided human colonies regularly. They came from the lawless regions beyond Council space, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction behind. Commander's ships were too slow to catch them. Each time he had to call for Council peacekeepers. Those peacekeepers always arrived days after the pirates had left. Then they sent Earth a bill for their services. Protection costs, they called it extortion, but only in private. The worst part was seeing how the system broke people's spirits. On Earth and the 12 colonies, children learned in school that this was just how things were. The Council was in charge. Humans had to follow the rules. Asking for more was unrealistic. Dreaming of freedom was childish. Saw it happening and felt sick. Humanity was not being destroyed by weapons. They were being destroyed by acceptance. Dr. Minyu tried to work within the restrictions. Every research project had to be submitted to the Bureau. Every experiment had to be documented and justified. Promising discoveries were classified as dangerous and shut down. New medicines that could save millions required decades of approval processes. Meanwhile, Council species enjoyed all these technologies and more. They sold them to humans at prices so high that only the wealthy could afford them. One day, Minyu received a visitor in his laboratory. The man was old, with gray hair and tired eyes. He introduced himself as director and said he represented a private research group. They were working on a project, he explained carefully. A project that might interest someone with Minyu's skills and frustrations. He could not say more here, where Council surveillance surely listened. But if Minyu was willing to take a risk, there might be a way to contribute to humanity's future. Minyu studied the old man's face. He saw something there he had not seen in years. Hope. Real hope, not the false optimism that people used to get through each day. He asked what kind of project, smiled sadly. The kind that the Council would never approve, he said. The kind that might matter. Minyu thought about the rejection notices piled on his desk. He thought about the children growing up in cages. He said yes. Across the human worlds, similar conversations were happening. Captain, now an admiral commanding the pathetic defense fleet, received a coded message. Engineer, working in the orbital shipyards building slow Council-approved vessels, was contacted by someone who spoke of building something different. Scientist, whose proposals for closed environment systems had been rejected for 20 years, found herself invited to a secret meeting. They gathered in hidden places, deep mining facilities where Council sensors did not reach, abandoned sections of old space stations, private homes with walls lined in signal-blocking material, and there they learned about Project Exodus. Director explained the plan in quiet words that struck like thunder. If humanity could not expand in this galaxy, they would leave it. They would build ships that could cross the void between galaxies and find a new home where no Council could tell them no. The plan was insane. The technology required did not exist. The resources needed were beyond calculation. The time it would take was measured in centuries, and the secrecy necessary to hide it from the Council seemed impossible. But as spoke, the people gathered in those hidden rooms felt something wake up inside them. It was the thing that had driven humanity to climb mountains and cross oceans and reach for the stars. It was the refusal to accept that no meant forever. Admiral asked the obvious question. How could they possibly hide the construction of an escape fleet from the Council's eyes? Had an answer. They would build in the cloud, in the dark spaces beyond the planets where Council sensors rarely looked. They would move resources slowly over decades, disguised as mining operations and scientific research. They would use every legal loophole and bureaucratic blind spot the Council's own system provided. Engineer asked how they would power ships capable of intergalactic travel, admitted they did not know yet. That was why they needed people like her. They needed humanity's best minds working on problems the Council said were impossible. Not because the problems truly were impossible, but because solving them would free humanity from control. The meetings ended with oaths of secrecy. No one could tell family or friends. The Council had informants everywhere, humans who had been bought or broken. One leak could destroy everything before it began. The people who left those hidden gatherings carried a terrible burden. They knew something that could save their species, but they had to watch their world suffer in silence while they worked. Years passed. On the surface, nothing changed. Humanity continued to petition the Council for more colony rights. They continued to file requests for technology approvals. They continued to pay tribute and follow rules and act like obedient subjects. The Council smiled and nodded and kept the chains tight. They did not see the truth. In the dark beyond Neptune, in the cold and quiet places where light itself seemed to die, something was beginning. Small pieces at first. A station here. A manufacturing facility there. Materials moving through shell companies and false manifests. Slowly, so slowly that it looked like nothing at all, humanity was building its escape. Director stood on the observation deck of Station Alpha and watched the construction crews work in the darkness. The station floated in the cloud, so far from Earth's sun that the star was just another point of light among millions. Here, beyond the reach of Council sensors, humanity was building its future. The sight before him was both beautiful and terrifying. 3 massive frames stretched into the void, the skeletal beginnings of generation ships that would carry millions across the intergalactic dark. 60 years had passed since Project Exodus began. 60 years of absolute secrecy. 60 years of sacrifice. Was an old man now, and he would not live to see the ships complete. But he had dedicated his life to this work, and he would die knowing it had been worth everything. Engineer had become the project's chief designer. She worked 18-hour days, solving problems that should have been impossible. How do you build ships large enough to hold cities? How do you make them strong enough to survive a 5,000-year journey? The Council kept all the best materials and manufacturing techniques for themselves, so had to invent new ones. She created alloys from asteroid mining that were stronger than anything the Council used. She designed modular construction techniques that let the ships grow piece by piece like living things. The ships were enormous beyond imagination. Each one was being carved from a single large asteroid, hollowed out and reinforced and transformed. When complete, they would be 40 kilometers long and 15 kilometers wide. Cities inside asteroids, cities that would fly between galaxies. The scale made some workers weep when they first saw the plans. How could humanity build such things in secret? Admiral had taken over fleet coordination when Admiral retired. His job was to move resources from the inner system to the construction sites without the Council noticing. It was like hiding an ocean by moving it one cup at a time. Mining ships made runs to the cloud, officially looking for rare elements. Scientific expeditions explored the outer dark, officially studying comets. Corporate freighters moved supplies between colonies, with small amounts diverted at each stop. Every manifest was. Every log was carefully crafted to hide the truth. The Council's bureaucracy became humanity's ally. The system was so massive and complex that no one could track everything. Reports were filed in triplicate and reviewed by committees that took months to make decisions. By the time anyone might notice something odd, the supplies were already gone and new false reports covered the gaps. The Council had built a system to control others. Humanity used that same system to hide rebellion. Scientists solved what everyone thought would be the impossible problem. The journey to Andromeda would take 5,000 years even at the speeds the new ships could achieve. No one could live that long. Supplies could not last that long. Developed closed-loop ecosystems that recycled everything with perfect efficiency. Air, water, food, waste, everything flowed in circles that never ended. She created forests inside the ships, lakes and rivers, soil rich with bacteria and worms. The ships would be worlds unto themselves. But even perfect ecosystems could not solve the time problem. That was where researcher made her breakthrough. The Council had suspended animation technology, but it was crude and dangerous. 1 in 5 people who went into Council suspension pods never woke up. The Council accepted this because they had populations to spare. Humanity could not accept such losses. Spent 30 years studying the problem. She found the answer in human biology itself. The Council's technology tried to freeze and preserve. Its approach was different. She slowed the body's processes down to almost nothing while keeping cellular repair active. People would not be frozen. They would sleep at 1,000th of normal speed. Their dreams would last centuries. Their bodies would age only 5 years during the 5,000-year journey. The success rate in testing was 99%. It was better than anything the Council had. The work demanded everything from everyone. People spent their entire lives on Project Exodus. Engineer designed the engines that would push the massive ships to 30% of light speed. He started as a young man and worked until his hair was white and his hands shook. He would never ride the ships he built. None of the original workers would, but they built anyway because it was not about them. It was about humanity's future. Only 100,000 people knew the full truth. They were chosen carefully. Scientists, engineers, construction workers, coordinators. Each one had to be someone who could be trusted absolutely. Each one had to be willing to keep the secret even from their own families. Some broke under the strain. A few tried to leak information, driven mad by the burden. Those few were quietly removed and kept in comfortable isolation until the project was complete. It was cruel but necessary. One leak to the Council would end everything. The ships grew slowly. After 60 years, they were half complete. After 80 years, the first ship's ecosystem was functional, forests growing under artificial light in the hollowed asteroid's core. After 100 years, engineers stood in what would be a city square inside the Horizon's promise and cried. She was 75 years old and had given her entire adult life to this place. She would never see it launch, but her children's children might walk these streets under alien stars. Director died at 110 years old, still working until the end. His last words to the project leaders were simple: finish it. No matter what, finish it. They promised they would. On his memorial plaque installed in the Horizon's promise, they wrote that he had been the father of humanity's future. It was true. After 120 years of construction, the 300 ships were complete. 300 asteroids had been transformed into generation ships. Each one could hold 12 million people in suspended animation. Together, they would carry 4 billion souls away from the galaxy that had rejected them. The fleet was ready. Captain was chosen to command the Horizon's Promise, the lead ship of the fleet. He was young, only 40, which meant he would still be young when they reached Andromeda. He walked through the ship and marveled at what humanity had built in secret. Schools stood ready for children who would be born during the journey. Hospitals waited with equipment more advanced than anything on Earth. Farms stretched under dome lighting, ready to feed millions. This was not just an escape. It was a new beginning. Now came the hardest part, moving 4 billion people to the ships without the Council noticing. It had to be done slowly over years. People would disappear from Earth and the colonies a few thousand at a time. They would file for transfers, claim family emergencies, accept job relocations. The Council tracked population movements, but not perfectly. As long as the departures seemed normal and spread out, no one would connect them. Admiral coordinated the evacuation plan. Shuttles would move people to orbital stations, then to transfer points, then to the cloud. Each person would be told the truth only at the last moment when they boarded the ships. Until then, they would think they were moving to new jobs or joining distant family. The secrecy had to hold until the very end. 120 years of work could not be destroyed by panic or loose talk. The evacuation began. On Earth and the 12 colonies, people started leaving. They hugged their friends goodbye and promised to write. They packed their belongings and boarded shuttles. They did not know they would never return. They did not know they were part of something vast. Not yet. But soon they would learn. Soon they would understand what humanity had been building in the dark. The evacuation took 3 years. 3 years of carefully orchestrated movements that looked like nothing unusual. Governor oversaw the departures from Earth's largest city. Every day, shuttles lifted from spaceports carrying people who thought they were starting normal new lives elsewhere. Some were told they had won lottery selections for better colony positions. Others received job offers that seemed too good to refuse. Families packed up and left, excited for opportunities that awaited them. Only when they reached the transfer stations did they learn the truth. Captain stood in the orientation hall of Transfer Station 7 and watched people's faces as they were told. They were not going to new jobs. They were leaving the galaxy forever. Some cried. Some laughed in disbelief. Some stood in shocked silence. But almost none asked to go back. When they learned what humanity had built, when they understood what Project Exodus truly meant, they wanted to be part of it. The ships filled slowly. Millions entered suspended animation and began their long dreams. The medical teams worked constantly, processing people through the suspension chambers. Researcher personally oversaw the first 10,000 to make sure her technology worked as promised. She was 70 now, with gray hair and a face marked by decades of worry. When the first sleepers woke for their test runs, healthy and perfect after simulated years of sleep, she finally allowed herself to believe it would work. On Earth and the colonies, the Council's bureaucrats noticed nothing wrong. Population numbers shifted but within normal ranges. Economic activity remained stable. The humans still attended council sessions and filed their endless paperwork and paid their tribute. Everything seemed normal because humanity had become experts at making lies look like truth. Diplomat continued her work at the council station. She sat through meetings about trade regulations and resource allocations. She smiled at the council members who thought they owned humanity's future. Inside, she burned with the knowledge that soon, very soon, their control would end. She had volunteered to be among the last to leave. Someone had to maintain appearances until the final moment. The delegate approached her one day after a session. His species had been ground down by council exploitation for so long that he looked permanently defeated. He asked how she stayed hopeful. How did she keep fighting when the council always won? Wanted to tell him the truth. She wanted to say that humanity was leaving and he should consider doing the same, but she could not. The secret had to hold, so she just smiled and said that hope was all anyone had. After 3 years, the last shuttle carried the last group to the fleet. 4 billion people slept in the ships. Only the essential crew remained awake, 10,000 per ship to monitor systems and handle the departure. Captain stood on the bridge of Horizon's Promise and looked at the fleet assembled around him. 300 massive ships, each one carrying millions of dreams. They were ready. Governor had composed a message to be broadcast to the council after departure. She recorded it in an empty government building on Earth, her voice echoing in halls that would soon be abandoned forever. She spoke of betrayal and chains. She spoke of 50 years begging for justice and receiving only cruelty. She spoke of humanity's patience ending. The message was scheduled to broadcast 1 hour after the fleet left the galaxy's edge. Scholar had spent 10 years compiling evidence, documents, recordings, testimony from thousands of humans about every injustice they had suffered under council rule. Other younger species had contributed too, secretly sharing their own stories of exploitation. The archive was massive and irrefutable. It showed exactly what the council was. Not a government of equals, but a protection racket dressed in diplomatic language. This archive would be released simultaneously with Governor's message. The fleet began to move. The engines that Engineer had designed came to life, pushing the massive ships forward. They accelerated slowly at first, building speed as they left the cloud. The ships traveled in formation, 300 points of light moving together through the dark. They passed Neptune, then Uranus, heading outward toward the galaxy's edge. On Earth, automated systems continued to function. Lights turned on and off on timers. Factories ran their programs. Transportation networks moved empty vehicles on their routes. From orbit, the planet looked inhabited. The Council's monitoring systems saw nothing unusual. All the colony worlds were the same. Life appeared normal because humanity had designed it that way. The fleet reached the galaxy's edge after 6 months of acceleration. They were traveling at 20% of light speed now, and the engines pushed them faster. The Milky Way galaxy spread behind them, a spiral of light growing smaller with each passing hour. Ahead was darkness, the vast intergalactic void that would be their home for 5,000 years. Captain gave the order, release the messages. Back in the galaxy, on servers hidden throughout human space, the files began to broadcast. Governor's message played in the council chambers. Scholars' archives flooded the galactic networks. And one by one, timed perfectly, every human facility in the galaxy sent a simple automated message. We are gone. Do not follow. The council's reaction was chaos. The head counselor, who had welcomed humanity 200 years earlier, watched the messages in disbelief. This was impossible. Younger species did not leave. They did not have the resources or technology or will. They accepted their place and lived within the rules. But the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had built a fleet in secret and disappeared. Ambassador had remained behind at the council station specifically to see their faces. She was the only human left in council space, and she had volunteered for this final duty. She stood in the chambers as the counselors raged and panicked. Some demanded pursuit. Others called for sanctions. A few sat in silence, reading the archives that had compiled. The tree-like head counselor turned too. His branches shook with what might have been anger or fear. Where had humanity gone? Smiled. Somewhere you cannot follow, she said. Somewhere your rules do not reach. The counselor demanded coordinates. Laughed. Even if she gave them, she said, the council's ships could never catch the fleet. Humanity had spent 2 centuries building engines that left council technology in the dust. Council ships were dispatched anyway. Military vessels, the fastest they had, raced to the last known human positions. They found empty worlds, cities with lights burning but no people in the streets, spaceports with ships in the docks and no one to fly them. The human colonies were ghost towns, perfectly preserved but devoid of life. The council ships pushed to the galaxy's edge and saw nothing. The human fleet was gone, vanished into the dark between galaxies. Some council members tried to claim this was good. Let the humans go, they said. One fewer species to deal with. But the older and wiser members understood the truth. Ambassador explained it to them before she left. Humanity had not just escaped. They had proven escape was possible. They had shown that the council could be. The archives they released had given every oppressed species in the galaxy a blueprint for resistance. Boarded her small personal ship and prepared to leave. The council could not stop her. She was the last human, and holding her would accomplish nothing. As she departed the station, she broadcast one final message. She thanked the council for teaching humanity an important lesson. They had shown humans what tyranny looked like. They had demonstrated that no amount of diplomatic language could hide exploitation. And most importantly, they had proven that freedom was worth any price. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed and disappeared, would not join the fleet. She was too old to survive the journey even with suspension technology. Instead, she would spend her remaining years traveling the galaxy, speaking to other younger species, planting seeds of rebellion. The council had made her an ambassador. She would use that position well. In the void between galaxies, the Horizon's Promise and its fleet continued their journey. Captain prepared to enter suspension himself. The ship's systems were running perfectly. The crew would wake every 100 years to check on things, but otherwise they would sleep. He recorded a final log entry. Humanity had left its birthplace, he said, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The galaxy had no room for them, so they would make room elsewhere. 20 years had passed since humanity vanished from the galaxy. 20 years of consequences that the council had not foreseen. Counselor sat in the chambers and watched the chaos unfold around him. He was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species. He had been on the council when humanity first arrived, had voted to impose the Accords of Limitation. Now he watched as those decisions destroyed everything the Council had built. The archives that Scholar released had spread like fire through the galactic networks. Every younger species read them. Every exploited civilization saw their own suffering reflected in humanity's documentation. They were the first to revolt. They stopped paying tribute. When Council peacekeepers arrived to enforce payment, they fought back. Their rebellion was crushed, but it inspired others. They came next. They were a species that had joined the Council 300 years earlier and had been slowly bled dry by tribute payments and technology restrictions. They declared independence and sealed their borders. Council ships tried to blockade them. They destroyed those ships with weapons they had been developing in secret for decades. Apparently, humanity was not the only species that had learned to hide things from Council oversight. Counselor watched the reports come in from across the galaxy. She was human, the daughter of parents who had chosen to stay behind when the fleet departed. A few thousand humans had remained, mostly those too old or sick to survive the journey. Had been young then, and she had dedicated her life to representing the memory of her people. Now she saw that memory tearing the Council apart. The economic collapse came slowly and then all at once. Human trade had been dismissed as insignificant, but the numbers did not lie. Humans had been involved in 17 sectors of the galactic economy. They manufactured goods efficiently because they had to make do with restricted technology. They provided services that other species had abandoned as unprofitable. When humanity disappeared, those holes could not be filled easily. Counselor, no relation to the engineer who had built the fleet engines, reviewed the economic data. He was one of the tree-like species, related to the head counselor who had welcomed and then chained humanity. The numbers horrified him. Council species had grown dependent on human manufacturing without realizing it. Prices were rising across the galaxy. Supply chains were breaking down. Some worlds were experiencing shortages of basic goods. The younger species saw the Council's weakness. More revolts erupted. Some were peaceful, simply refusing to follow Council directives. Others were violent, with species attacking Council facilities and ships. The 17 founding species tried to maintain control, but their resources were stretched thin. They had kept the peace for thousands of years through overwhelming force. Now that force was not enough. Counselor called for an emergency session. The chambers filled with representatives from across the galaxy. The mood was dark, stood and spoke of what he had finally come to understand. The Council had failed, he said, not recently but from the beginning. They had built a system that called itself a government but was actually an empire. They had demanded loyalty but given nothing to be loyal to. They had offered stability at the price of freedom, and now both stability and freedom were lost. Some counselors shouted him down. The system had worked for, they argued. If younger species were ungrateful, that was their failing, not the Council's, but shook his branches sadly. Humanity was not ungrateful, he said. Humanity was practical. They had asked for justice and received exploitation. They had begged for room to grow and been given chains. When the chains became unbearable, they left. That was not ingratitude. That was survival. The debate raged for weeks. Some Council members proposed reforms, lower the tribute rates, ease the technology restrictions, give younger species real representation, but others resisted every change. If they showed weakness now, they said, every species would demand more. The Council would lose all authority. Better to crush the rebellions and restore order by force. Counselor listened to the debates and felt despair. These people learned nothing. They still thought the problem was younger species being difficult. They could not see that the problem was the system itself. She stood and spoke in the chambers, knowing her words would likely be ignored. Her people had left because they had no other choice, she said. They had tried to work within the system for 200 years. They had filed every petition correctly, followed every rule, paid every tribute. And in return, they had been slowly strangled. The Council did nothing. No reforms were passed. The rebellions continued. More species followed humanity's example, not by fleeing the galaxy but by refusing Council authority. The carefully maintained order crumbled. Trade routes that had been stable for thousands of years became war zones. Council peacekeepers fought on 100 fronts and could not win. On the 12 empty human worlds, the Council tried to establish new colonies. Other species were given permission to settle there. But something strange happened. The new colonists found the human cities and chose to leave them intact. The empty buildings became monuments. People walked through the silent streets and thought about what it meant that an entire species had chosen exile over submission. Earth became a pilgrimage site. Ships from across the galaxy visited the of humanity. They walked through the abandoned cities and read the messages that had been left behind. In city squares and government buildings, humans had placed plaques explaining why they left. The plaques were simple and devastating. We asked for freedom and were given chains. We begged for room to grow and were. We worked within your system for 200 years and found only exploitation. So we left. This could have been avoided. Counselor made the journey to Earth. He walked through the capital city where Ambassador had received the first council message so long ago. The building stood empty but intact. Automated systems still functioned. Gardens still grew because robots tended them. It was a living ghost town, a monument to everything the council had lost. In the central government plaza found a memorial. It listed the names of all the younger species that had suffered under council rule. Some had gone extinct. Some had been destroyed by tribute payments they could not afford. Some had simply given up and stagnated. Humanity's name was on the list, but it had a notation. Escaped. Stood before that memorial and finally understood the full weight of what the council had done. Scholars' archives continued to spread. New species discovered them every year. They learned about the 12-world limit and the forbidden technologies and the endless tribute. They learned that the council claimed to protect younger species while actually exploiting them. The archives became the foundation for a movement. Some called it the Freedom Coalition. Others called it the New Council. Whatever the name, it represented species that refused to accept the old system. The council built a memorial on their central station. It listed all the species that had left or been lost during council history. The list was longer than anyone expected. Humanity was not the first to disappear. They were just the most dramatic. The memorial's inscription read, "Lest we forget." But Counselor wondered what exactly they were trying not to forget. The species they had lost or the reasons those species left. Counselor proposed a radical change. Abolish the accords of limitation. Let species govern themselves. Transform the council from a ruling body into an actual cooperative organization where all species had equal voice. The proposal was rejected. Too dangerous, the majority said. It would mean giving up control, but persisted. They had already lost control, he argued. The rebellions proved that. They could either change willingly or be destroyed by resistance. The debate continued. Years passed. The galaxy grew more chaotic, and in the void between galaxies, the human fleet sailed on toward Andromeda. They had been traveling for 20 years now. 4,980 years remained before they would arrive. The sleepers dreamed of a new home. The skeleton crews that woke every 100 years saw the Milky Way growing smaller behind them and felt no regret. Captain had entered suspension after recording his final log, but he had programmed a message to broadcast on repeat, powerful enough that it might reach back to the galaxy they had left. The message was simple. To those who follow our path, we left because we had to, but we also left to prove it could be done. No cage lasts forever. No council rules eternal. Find your own horizon. The galaxy is large, but the universe is larger. There is always somewhere else to go. Some species heard that message and began building their own fleets. The technology was difficult, but humanity had proven it was possible. If humans could cross the intergalactic void, others could too. The Council tried to stop these projects, but they were too busy fighting rebellions to enforce restrictions. Counselor stood in the council chambers one final time before his retirement. He was ancient now, even by his species' standards. He had lived long enough to see the consequences of every bad decision the council had made. In his final speech, he said what everyone knew but no one wanted to admit. The council had killed itself, not through external attack but through internal rot. They had built a system that only worked if everyone accepted it. Humanity's departure had shown that acceptance was not guaranteed. The question was what would come next: reform or collapse, evolution or extinction. The council stood at a crossroads and time was running out. In the empty human cities on 12 worlds, the wind blew through silent streets. The lights still burned on automatic timers, and somewhere in the dark between galaxies, 4 billion people dreamed of freedom.